today we are diving deep into the DNA of that supply chain.
Yeah, the very backbone of how things get done.
Exactly. And our mission today is basically to give you a shortcut, a foundational understanding of the strategic architecture, the movements, the flows, and, the structural choices that govern how pretty much everything moves globally.
Yeah.
We're talking about the physics of this whole system, really.
And we definitely need that common language. Our sources, including some key definitions from the ASCM Supply Chain Dictionary, they really help cut through the jargon. I mean, you look at real-world networks, the ones run by giants like Boeing or Walmart or Nestle, they are just mind-bogglingly complex.
Right.
But understanding the core models, it simplifies things. It shows managers the clear roles, the processes, the boundaries they have to work within. It gives structure to the chaos, kind of. Okay, let's unpack this then. Before we get into the big strategies, we need that common language. How should we think about the fundamental network part of a supply chain?
Well, our sources define it quite nicely, actually.
Yeah.
They say it's the network of suppliers that deliver products from raw materials to end customers through either an engineered or transactional flow of information, goods, and money.
Okay.
The key thing there, I think, is that it's both a network of companies and a series of linked processes. It's not just who, it's also how.
Got it. And the structure of this network, it's organized into levels called echelons. That term itself, it kind of clarifies the layering, doesn't it?
It does.
So if I'm a manager, how many echelons is, too many? What's the real strategic cost of adding just one more layer?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? An echelon is basically just a layer of nodes in the network. So the source gives this example. If you have, say, 2 factory warehouses, then maybe 9 wholesale warehouses, and then 350 retail stores.
Right.
Well, you've got 3 distinct echelons there between the factory and the final customer.
3 layers.
Okay. And here's the strategic trade-off you asked about. Every single echelon adds operating expense. It ties up inventory that's capital just sitting there. It adds to the total cycle time, how long everything takes. And crucially, each layer expects to make a profit.
Right. Everyone needs their cut. So if an echelon adds cost and time, why would companies ever willingly add more layers? Seems counterintuitive.
They have to justify it by adding value, you see. Maybe that layer provides crucial consolidation for transport efficiency, saving money overall. Or perhaps it's about holding inventory regionally so you can meet customer demand really quickly. You're essentially betting that the value you gain, like speed or consolidation, outweighs that added cost and complexity. Makes sense?
Yeah, it does. It's a calculated risk. So to make the system work, we need the players. Who are the 5 essential entities we really need to keep in mind here?
Okay, let's break it down. At the very start, you have the supplier. And it's important, as the sources note, to distinguish them from just a generic vendor. Well, a supplier provides strategic materials or components, things that are essential to your final product. The vendor is just, a seller in the marketplace. Could be anyone. The supplier relationship is usually much deeper.
Okay. Strategic supplier. Got it. Then the consolidation warehouse, we mentioned that for transport efficiencies.
Right. Then comes the producer, the one who actually transforms the materials into finished goods. Your factory, essentially.
Then after the producer?
After the producer, you typically have 1 or more intermediate customers. Now, this is a broad category. It covers your distribution centers, wholesalers, retailers, basically anyone between the factory and the end user.
Right. And finally,
the ultimate customer, the person or entity who actually consumes the product or service.
Okay, the 5 players. Supplier, consolidator, producer, intermediates, customer. Now, tying them all together are the 5 primary flows. People often just picture the trucks moving goods, right? But that's only one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. That's the primary product flow. The physical materials or services moving downstream towards the consumer. That's one. And there's also the information flow, which is critical and moves back and forth, constantly linking everyone. So those are the 2 generally moving downstream.
Okay, product and info. What about upstream?
Well, that's where it gets really strategic. There are 3 key upstream flows. First, the strategic requirements flow. This is absolutely crucial. It starts with what the customer actually needs or wants, and that dictates the whole production strategy. It flows upstream from the customer through the retailers, the distributors, all the way back to the supplier.
So you don't just start with what the factory can make.
Exactly. You start with customer demand. That pull dictates everything.
Makes sense. And the other 2 upstream.
Then we have the primary cash flow. Money moving upstream, paying for everything as it goes, from customer back to supplier eventually.
The money trail.
Yep. And finally, the fifth flow, which is often overlooked but increasingly important, the reverse flow. This covers returns, recycling, disposal, even manufacturing waste sometimes, things moving back up the chain.
Okay, so 5 flows. Information everywhere, product downstream, and then strategic requirements, cash, and reverse flows all moving upstream. Let's maybe dig into one of those upstream flows a bit more. The one everyone knows can be a real pain point. The money.
Cash flow.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is how money moves, or sometimes doesn't move efficiently. While the funds obviously flow upstream, our sources really highlight that this process is often, and I quote, uncoordinated and suboptimized.
Uncoordinated and suboptimized. That sounds bad.
It can be. Despite all the incredible advances in logistics and tracking goods, you still find many mid-sized companies and honestly, even some massive corporations relying on pretty archaic systems. Think paper invoices, manual checks.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Still, that seems like a huge drag on efficiency.
It is. But improving that cash flow isn't just about, faster logistics or better IT. It's actually a core strategic lever you can pull.
How so? What are the bigger benefits?
Well, for one, improving the promptness and transparency of payments really improves customer-supplier relationships. Think about it. If a supplier knows they'll be paid reliably and on time, their perception of risk goes down.
Right, less uncertainty for them.
Exactly. And that encourages better communication, maybe even better forecasting. They can operate with less buffer inventory because they're not constantly worried about cash flow gaps.
And I read it also plays a role in leveling the playing field sometimes, stabilizing power dynamics.
Absolutely. It helps reduce that imbalance where you might have these huge retailers, say, demanding really liberal payment terms from their manufacturers.
Like pay us in 90 days or 120 days.
Right. And then those manufacturers, feeling the squeeze, turn around and pressure their own smaller, often financially weaker suppliers for similar terms. This whole cascade of extended payment terms can actually bankrupt a small but vital supplier at the end of the chain.
Wow. So smooth cash flow keeps the whole ecosystem healthier. How do companies measure this financial efficiency then?
The key metric here is the cash-to-cash cycle time, sometimes called the cash conversion cycle.
Okay.
It measures precisely how long it takes for a dollar or euro or whatever that you invest in operations like buying raw materials, paying labor to come back to you through customer sales.
So the shorter that cycle, the better.
The shorter, the better. Reducing that cycle time fundamentally frees up working capital. It's almost like generating an internal loan,
I see. Because that cash isn't tied up for as long.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's stuck in inventory sitting on shelves or tied up in accounts receivable waiting for customers to pay. Innovations like cross-docking, for instance, where products are moved almost immediately from incoming trucks to outgoing trucks without being stored, are so valuable partly because they slash the time inventory is held, shrinking that CTC cycle dramatically.
Right, keeping things moving. And speaking of goals, SEM, it has to be about creating net value, doesn't it? Not just blindly cutting costs. I loved that the sources cautioned that some early efforts focusing only on cost reduction sometimes had a net negative effect. What does that actually mean in practice? Reducing the ability to create value.
Yeah, that's a critical point. It basically means sacrificing really important attributes, things like quality or flexibility or speed, just to achieve a relatively small cost saving. So, for example, maybe a company cuts costs by relying solely on one single, very distant supplier. Okay, maybe they save a few pennies per unit, but they lose the ability to pivot quickly if customer demand suddenly changes, or if there's a geopolitical crisis or natural disaster that hits that one supplier. They've gained a tiny bit of cost efficiency, maybe, but they've lost responsiveness and resilience. The net effect for the customer, and often the company, is negative value.
So you need balance. And that net value creation, it's typically managed or orchestrated by one strong company in the chain, right? The channel master or nucleus firm.
Usually, yes.
Yeah.
Often it's a powerful manufacturer or maybe a dominant retailer like a Walmart or Amazon. They're often the ones who kind of design and oversee the entire system, setting the rules of engagement.
They hold the power.
They do, but the responsibility is broader than just their own bottom line. While that channel master organizes things, the chain as a whole must produce value for every stakeholder involved. That includes the suppliers, the logistics providers, the distributors, the retailers, not just the end consumer or the channel master's own investors. If value isn't shared somewhat equitably, the chain becomes unstable. People look for alternatives. It breaks down.
That leads us perfectly, actually, into the biggest strategic debate in this whole field. Do you build a wall around your entire process, own everything, Or do you rely on specialists? Let's talk about the two major structural models for organizing all these complex entities and flows. This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, we can start with the historical heavyweight, vertical integration. This is the classic approach, the practice of basically bringing the entire supply chain, or as much of it as possible, inside one single organization, owning it end to end.
Right. The classic example they always give is like a paper company owning the forest land, the trees, the mills, the processing plants, maybe even the trucks that ship the paper.
Exactly. But the truly iconic example, the one that really embodies absolute self-sufficiency, has to be Henry Ford.
Ford, of course.
Ford didn't just want efficiency. He craved control. He wanted resilience against any outside disruption. He famously went out and bought iron ore mines, built steel mills, owned rubber plantations in Brazil, even had his own fleet of ships to transport everything, all to ensure total self-sufficiency for his massive Rouge manufacturing complex near Detroit.
It sounds like it wasn't just about business efficiency. It was almost an exercise in pure paranoia about relying on anyone else.
There was definitely an element of that. He wanted absolute predictability, so was the primary benefit always that control?
Seems like it.
Without question. Control is the absolute core reason for vertical integration. All the operations are visible, at least in theory, right? And they can be synchronized by top-down directives from management. Vertical integration completely solves that fundamental problem of who designs, who plans, and who monitors all the supply chain activities. The answer is simple. The parent company does.
Makes coordination easier, on paper anyway. Now, full-blown vertical integration like Ford's is pretty rare today, isn't it? Too complex, too costly.
Generally, yes. The sheer capital investment and management complexity are enormous. But we do see successful partial integration. McDonald's is a great example you mentioned.
Right. They don't own the potato farms, but they have immense influence.
Exactly. They exercise incredible control through things like very long-term supply contracts. It's sometimes called a vested interest model. Their key suppliers are highly motivated to invest in McDonald's-specific processes, specialized equipment, quality standards, because those contracts guarantee huge volume and often involve shared success metrics. It aligns incentives without full ownership.
And downstream, their control is often physical, right? McDonald's frequently owns the actual land that its franchised restaurants sit on.
Yes. That secures a steady revenue stream through rent, obviously, but it also gives them ultimate control over the prime retail locations, a critical piece of their distribution chain.
Okay, so partial integration exists. But despite those targeted successes, you said lateral, or sometimes called horizontal, integration is really the favored modern strategy. Tell us about that.
Right. Lateral integration is essentially the opposite philosophy. This is where organizations consciously decide to outsource activities where they believe they are least effective, or where someone else can do it much better or cheaper.
So specialization is the name of the game here. Focus on your core competencies, what you do best, and rely on other specialists for the rest of the chain.
Precisely. Corporate ownership gives up that direct, day-to-day control we talked about with vertical integration. But in return, it gains immense focus and potentially accesses world-class capabilities from its partners.
We saw this massive historical shift across industries, right? Like the auto industry you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. Think about Ford. Chrysler shedding its Mopar parts division years ago, General Motors divesting its massive Delphi Corporation components unit. All these huge, formerly vertically integrated giants spun off their component production arms to focus purely on vehicle design, final assembly, marketing, and sales, their perceived core competencies.
So what were the big reasons? Why did specialization ultimately beat out total control in most industries?
Well, there are a few key standing reasons. The first one is simply economies of scale and scope. It's powerful. Think about it. No matter how huge a vertically integrated company is, its internal logistics division or its in-house component factory probably can't match the sheer scale, and therefore the lower costs, achieved by an independent specialist provider. Someone like, say, DHL for logistics, or Bosch for automotive components.
Because those specialists serve hundreds, maybe thousands of clients globally.
Exactly. Their volume drives down costs in a way an internal department just can't replicate. Second big reason, improve business focus and expertise. Trying to expertly manage iron ore mining, global shipping, and complex car assembly all under one corporate roof multiplies complexity exponentially. It's incredibly difficult.
You end up being mediocre at everything instead of great at one thing.
Potentially, yes. Independent specialists, by definition, can develop much deeper expertise in their specific niche than a single sprawling corporation trying to be good at dozens of disparate businesses across the globe.
Okay, scale and focus. What else?
And the third major factor, really enabled by technology, is leveraging communication. Instantaneous, cheap global communication has dramatically minimized the traditional barriers to doing business effectively at a distance.
So managing partners across the world is just easier now.
Much easier. The source mentioned a great example. European clothing companies, like fast fashion brands, successfully using specialized Dutch logistics centers. Why Holland? Well, great central location, but also deep, sophisticated expertise in handling apparel distribution, e-commerce fulfillment, and crucially, managing returns efficiently. Outsourcing works because the communication and coordination are seamless.
It's interesting. Is there anything sort of in between pure vertical and pure lateral?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's important to note the intermediate model, particularly the Japanese keiretsu. How does that work? Well, in a keiretsu, you have a group of companies that remain legally and economically independent, but they work extremely closely together. They often have interlocking business relationships, maybe centered around a main bank or a large trading company. Members might own small amounts of stock in each other. It tries to capture some of the high trust, collaboration, and long-term perspective of vertical integration, but without the massive burden and rigidity of full ownership. It's a kind of collaborative network model.
Fascinating. Like a halfway house. But okay, back to the dominant lateral model. It sounds great, specialization, scale, focus. But it does come with one major difficulty, doesn't it? Which feels like the management challenge of our time.
It absolutely does. The big challenge is synchronizing the activities of this vast network of independent companies. How do you get everyone marching to the same beat? What each individual company gains in its specialized focus, the channel master, the orchestrator of the whole chain, can potentially lose in its ability to see, understand, and influence the larger end-to-end supply chain processes. Visibility and coordination become much harder.
You might optimize your little piece, but sub-optimize the whole system without realizing it.
That's the risk, losing sight of the big picture.
Wow. Okay, this has been a fantastic journey through the architecture. We've gone from defining the basic building blocks like echelons, understanding the strategic risks of adding layers, all the way through to contrasting that fundamental trade-off. The control of vertical integration versus the specialization and scale you get with lateral integration.
And yeah, that trade-off really does define so much of the modern market, doesn't it? The optimal structure for any given supply chain has to vary. It depends on its specific demand patterns, its history, the company's business focus, how much connectivity and responsiveness it needs. The fact that organizations like Gartner still rigorously analyze and rank the top 25 supply chain leaders every year, that just proves that mastering this structural design, this architectural expertise, is absolutely an ongoing, high-stakes competitive requirement. It's never solved.
Constantly evolving. Okay, and for one final thought for you, our listener, to maybe mull over, we talked quite a bit about the complexity of funds flow and how critical that cash-to-cash cycle time is for freeing up working capital. Now, given that cash has to flow upstream, ultimately originating from the customer, consider this. If we really lean into viewing the supply chain primarily as a set of linked processes, not just linked organizations or companies, how might focusing strategically on the efficiency and effectiveness of the reverse supply chain, that whole process of waste disposal, recycling, product returns, how might optimizing that create a previously untapped source of significant value, something beyond just cost savings or compliance?
That's an excellent question. Shifting focus from just delivery to the full life cycle, including recovery and sustainability. A lot to think about there. Thanks for diving in with us today.